The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Eleanor's small kitchen, casting soft, flowery patterns on the worn wooden table. It was a Tuesday, a day she always set aside for important errands. Today was more important than most. Tucked away in her worn leather handbag was a check that felt heavier than its paper suggested. It was the last of the funds from her late husband's pension account, money she had been saving for a very special reason. Her granddaughter, her little bird as she still called her, had been accepted into a university far away. The thought of her granddaughter, with her bright eyes and even brighter dreams, studying in a big city, made Eleanor's heart swell with a mix of pride and a gentle ache. This money wasn't just a gift. It was a promise, a piece of her and her husband's hard work sent off to help build the future. She wanted to do this herself, in person, to feel the finality of it, to close the account with her own two hands and send that love on its way. She took her time getting ready. A ritual she had practiced for over 60 years. She chose her best navy blue coat, the one with the clean lines and the brass buttons that her husband had always said made her look like a fine Hollywood star. She pinned a small, tasteful hat onto her white hair, ensuring not a single strand was out of place. In her world, presenting yourself neatly was a sign of respect, both for yourself and for the people you were about to meet. She carefully placed the check, her ID, and a few other necessities into her handbag, patting it once for reassurance. As she looked in the mirror, she saw not just an elderly woman, but the wife of a good man, the mother of successful children, and the grandmother of a brilliant girl. She felt ready. The journey to the bank was a small adventure in itself. The world outside her door was so fast now. Cars rushed by in a blur of color, and people on the street seemed to walk with a purpose she no longer possessed, their faces glued to small, glowing rectangles in their hands. She moved slowly, her steps careful and measured. She had always been a steady walker, but the pavement felt uneven now, and the crowd felt like a rushing river she had to cross. She clutched the strap of her handbag a little tighter, her small boat of dignity sailing against the current of a world that had forgotten how to wait. Finally, the large glass doors of the bank came into view. It was a modern building, all sharp angles and gleaming chrome, a stark contrast to the old, warm brick of the building where she and her husband had first opened their savings account. The doors slid open with a quiet whoosh, letting out a gust of cold, recycled air that smelled of sterile cleaner and faint, expensive perfume. Inside, the bank was a symphony of efficiency. Quiet, robotic beeps came from machines, digital numbers flashed on a screen, and the low, constant hum of computers filled the space. Everyone was busy. A line of people stood quietly, scrolling on their phones, looking ahead, not at each other. Eleanor took her place at the end of the line, feeling a little out of place, like a black and white photograph that had accidentally slipped into a world of vibrant color. She watched the young tellers behind the counters, moving with a practiced speed that was both impressive and intimidating. They were all so young, with perfectly styled hair and crisp uniforms. They spoke in quick, clipped tones and typed on keyboards without ever looking down. When her turn came, she approached a young woman whose name tag read Cindy. Cindy had sharp red lipstick and eyes that were focused intently on her computer screen. Even as she said, "Next, please," Eleanor stepped forward, offering a small, polite smile. "Good morning," she said, her voice a little softer than she intended. She placed the check gently on the counter. "I would like to cash this, please, and close the account." Cindy picked up the check, her long, painted nails tapping against the paper. She glanced at it, then her fingers flew across the keyboard. A few seconds later, a small frown creased her forehead. She looked up at Eleanor for the first time, a flicker of something like annoyance in her eyes. "This account is a legacy account. It needs a manager's override to process the closure." "Oh," Eleanor said, a little flustered. She had hoped it would be a simple transaction. "I see. Is there a problem?" "The system needs the manager," the teller repeated, her tone flat. She looked past Eleanor toward an office in the back. Then she looked at the computer screen, then back at Eleanor. "Can I see your ID, please?" "Of course." Eleanor began to open the clasp on her handbag, her fingers feeling a bit stiff in the cold air. It took her a moment longer than it used to. She pulled out her old driver's license, the one with a photo taken over a decade ago. "Here you are, dear." The teller took it, her expression unimpressed. She typed some more, then sighed, a small, almost inaudible sound that Eleanor still caught. "The ID format is out of date. The system needs the new ID number to match the account profile." She looked at Eleanor as if she were a difficult mathematical problem. "Do you have your passport or a state-issued ID card?" Eleanor felt a small knot form in her stomach. "My passport expired years ago, dear. This is the only identification I have. My husband always handled these things, and this was all we ever needed." Her voice was apologetic, as if she were personally responsible for the bank's complicated computer system. The teller let out a quiet sigh, but this time it wasn't just audible. It was a performance. She rolled her eyes just slightly, then turned to the teller at the next station over. "Another legacy account," she whispered, just loud enough for Eleanor to hear, a smile playing on her lips. The other teller, a young man with slicked back hair, chuckled softly and shook his head. They were two young people sharing a private joke, and Eleanor was the punchline. The heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks, a familiar and unwelcome flush of shame. She had worked her whole life, paid her taxes, and raised a family. She had never been a punchline before. She looked around at the other people in line, but they were all absorbed in their own worlds, oblivious. She was alone on that cold, gleaming stage, and the curtain was just beginning to rise on her humiliation. The soft chuckle from the next teller station was a tiny spark, but in the heavy silence of Eleanor's mind, it was enough to start a fire. She felt it burn in her chest and climb up her neck, warming her face until she was sure her skin was the color of a ripe tomato. The young woman behind the counter, Cindy, seemed to take this as her cue. She held Eleanor's driver's license between two fingers as if it were a dirty tissue, her bright red lips curling into a smirk. "I'm not sure we can process this," Cindy announced. Her voice loud and clear, no longer a whisper but a public declaration. "The format is, well, let's just say it's not in our system anymore. We can't verify it." She said, "Our system," like it was a holy temple and Eleanor's ID was a pagan idol trying to get in. Eleanor's heart sank. "But that's my only identification," she explained, her voice trembling just a little. She tried to sound strong, like the woman who had once managed a household of 4 children on a shoestring budget. But the confidence had leaked out of her, leaving her feeling small and hollow. The other teller, the young man with slick hair, leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. He looked right at Eleanor, then at Cindy, and let out a low, theatrical whistle. "Wow," he mouthed silently, his lips forming the word exaggeratedly. Cindy stifled a giggle, turning her back to Eleanor for a moment to compose herself. The shared, silent joke was worse than any words. It was a wall being built in front of her, brick by brick, with her as the unwilling foundation. I don't understand," Eleanor said, her voice even weaker now. She reached a hand out toward her license, a silent plea for its return. "I've been a customer at this bank for over 50 years. My husband and I opened our first savings account at the branch downtown, the one with the big marble steps. When they closed that, our account was moved here. It's the same money, the same people. This seemed to make it even funnier for them." The man told her, a big fake smile spreading across his face. He walked over to Cindy's counter, leaning on it with an exaggerated casualness. 50 years? He said, looking at Eleanor. "Did they have computers back then? Did you have to ride your horse and buggy to the bank to make a deposit?" A few people in the line behind Eleanor shifted their feet. One young woman looked up from her phone, a flicker of pity on her face, but then quickly looked down, as if she were embarrassed to have witnessed the exchange. The silence of the other customers was a heavy blanket, suffocating Eleanor's hope for an ally. She was on a stage, and the audience was either laughing or looking away. Cindy finally handed the license back, placing it on the counter with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "We're just trying to follow the rules, ma'am. To protect your account from ... fraud." She said the word fraud while looking directly at Eleanor. As if she, a grandmother of 4, were some kind of master criminal. The humiliation was a physical force now. Eleanor felt it in the way her hands began to shake, a tremor she couldn't control. She clutched the strap of her handbag, trying to ground herself, but she felt unsteady on her feet, as if the polished marble floor were tilting. Her mind raced back to her husband, a man of quiet strength and unwavering kindness. He would never have allowed this. He would have stood up tall, his voice calm and firm, and demanded respect. But he was gone, and she was left with only her wobbly voice and a trembling sense of dignity. Just then, a man in a suit and a name tag that read "Manager" walked out from a back office. He was a man with a perfectly shaven chin and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Cindy immediately waved him over. "Sir, we have a situation with a legacy account." The manager walked over, his eyes scanning Eleanor up and down, taking in her hat, her old coat, the worn handbag. He didn't look at her with concern, but with a kind of weary amusement. "What's the problem, Cindy?" he asked, his voice holding the same condescending tone as the teller's. "The idea's expired," Cindy explained, her voice dripping with a told-you-so satisfaction. "And the customer doesn't have any other form of identification. We were just explaining the policy." The manager picked up the check Eleanor had so carefully placed on the counter. He looked at it, then at Eleanor, and a slow, unpleasant smile spread across his face. He held the check up for Cindy and the other teller to see. "Well, well. Look at this. A real, live, old-fashioned check. Do you even print these anymore?" He looked at Eleanor. "Where did you say you got this, ma'am? From a time capsule?" The two tellers burst out laughing. It wasn't a quiet chuckle this time. It was a full, open, and ugly sound. A few more people in the line turned to look, their faces a mix of shock and discomfort. Eleanor felt the world shrink to just this small, cruel circle of people. Her vision blurred as tears pricked at her eyes. She fought them back, blinking rapidly. She would not cry. She would not give them that satisfaction. This check was not just paper. It was a piece of her life, a final gift of love from a man who had worked his whole life to provide for his family. And they were holding it up like a circus freak, a relic to be mocked. Her anger finally broke through her fear. "It is not a museum piece," she said, her voice surprisingly firm, cutting through their laughter. The laughter stopped, and they all looked at her, a little surprised. "That is my husband's pension. He worked for 45 years at the factory. He was a good man. That money is for my granddaughter, so she can go to college and have a better life than we did. I'm not a joke. And neither is he." The silence that followed was heavy and uncomfortable. The manager's smile vanished, replaced by a look of annoyance. He didn't like being challenged, especially not by an old woman who was supposed to be meek and compliant. He lowered the check, slapping it back down on the counter. "Ma'am, no one is saying your husband wasn't a good man," he said, his voice now sharp and cold. "We are saying that we have rules, protocols, and you are not following them. You are holding up my line and causing a scene." He gestured vaguely to the people behind her. "Either you come up with a valid form of ID, or we cannot help you. It's that simple." He had turned it around. He had made her the problem. She was the one causing a scene by daring to defend her husband's memory. Eleanor felt the last bit of strength drain out of her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The tremor in her hands had traveled up her arms, and she felt a cold shiver run through her entire body. The hum of the bank, the click of keyboards, the distant city traffic, it all faded into a dull, throbbing roar in her ears. She stood there, defeated and alone, a small island of sorrow in a sea of cold indifference and cruelty. She just wanted to go home. She just wanted her husband. While the cruel drama was unfolding at the counter, another story was being told in the quiet line of customers. A man stood near the middle of the queue, dressed simply in a dark jacket and a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He had a pair of simple black headphones on, but no music was playing. They were more like a shield, a signal to the world that he was in his own bubble, just another person trying to get through the day's errands without being bothered. His posture was relaxed, his hands tucked into his pockets, his focus on the scuffed tips of his own boots. He looked like anyone else, a bit tired, a bit lost in thought. At first, he didn't notice anything unusual. Banks were often places of hushed stress and impatience. But a sound broke through the fog of his own thoughts. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp and ugly. It was a laugh. It was the kind of laugh that wasn't meant to share joy, but to mock. He slowly lifted his head, pulling one of the earbuds out, his brow furrowed slightly. His eyes scanned the room and landed on the scene at the front counter. He saw the elderly woman, tiny and fragile in her neat coat, her shoulders slumped. He saw the young tellers, their faces bright with a mean-spirited glee that seemed utterly out of place in the quiet bank. He saw the manager in his suit, his posture one of smug authority. He couldn't hear every word, but he didn't need to. The body language told the whole story. He saw the way the teller rolled her eyes, the way the other one mimed a horse-riding motion, the way the manager held up a piece of paper as if it were something ridiculous. He saw the deep, burning shame on the old woman's face. He saw the way her hands trembled. Something shifted inside him. It wasn't a grand, dramatic feeling. It was a quiet, deepening sense of discomfort that quickly hardened into a firm resolve. He had seen people be unkind before. It was an unfortunate part of life. But this was different. This was a pack of young, able-bodied people who were supposed to be providing a service, ganging up on someone who could be their own grandmother. It was a public bullying, and the most painful part was that everyone else in the line was just watching. They were looking away, checking their phones, shuffling their feet, doing anything to avoid being pulled into the conflict. Their silence was just another form of cruelty, a quiet permission for the bullying to continue. The woman spoke then, her voice shaky but firm, defending her husband's memory. He saw the flash of strength in her, a small flame of defiance. But then the manager's cold reply extinguished it. He watched her shrink again, the life draining from her posture. She looked completely defeated. For the man in the baseball cap, that was the tipping point. This was no longer something he could just stand by and watch. His own mother had been that age. He thought about how she would feel if someone treated her this way. The thought made his jaw tighten. He took the other earbud out and put both headphones away in his jacket pocket. He took a deep, quiet breath, letting it out slowly. He wasn't thinking about being a celebrity. He wasn't thinking about what people would say or if someone would recognize him. He was just thinking about a person who needed help. It was that simple. He had a voice and she didn't. It was time to use it. He stepped out of the line. It wasn't a big, dramatic movement. It was just a quiet, decisive step to the side. A few people noticed, their expressions curious, but then they looked away again. He didn't walk with anger or aggression. He walked with a calm, steady purpose that seemed to cut through the tense atmosphere. He walked directly to the counter, stopping not in front of it, but beside the elderly woman, close enough that his shoulder was almost touching hers. He didn't look at her yet. His focus was entirely on the bank employees. His presence was like a sudden drop in temperature. The smug laughter died instantly. The teller, Cindy, who had been so confident moments before, now looked like a child caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Her eyes widened as she looked up from the counter and recognized the man standing there. Even under the shadow of his baseball cap, there was no mistaking him. Her face went from smug to shocked in a split second. "Excuse me," the man said. His voice wasn't loud. It was low, quiet, and level, but it carried a weight that made everyone stop what they were doing. It was a voice that demanded to be heard, not because of its volume, but because of its quiet authority. He looked directly at the young teller. "Is there a problem here?" He asked. The question hung in the air, simple and direct. Cindy's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked from the man to her manager, to the other teller, a panicked look on her face. The manager, seeing the famous actor, straightened up instantly, his slick, condescending smile replaced by a look of nervous hospitality. "Mr. Reeves!" "Sir," the manager stammered, smoothing down his tie. No problem at all. Just a small, technical issue with an account. We were just sorting it out." The man, Keanu Reeves, didn't even glance at the manager. His eyes stayed fixed on the young woman who had been laughing. He let the manager's words hang there for a moment, a flimsy attempt to cover the situation. Then he looked from the teller to the other staff members who had joined in the mockery. His gaze was not angry, but it was intense. It was a look that held them accountable. "It looks to me," he said, his voice still soft and calm, "like you were all laughing at this woman." He paused, letting the accusation settle. "Is that how this bank treats its customers? Is that the kind of service you're proud to provide?" The manager's face turned a shade of pale. The tellers looked down at their keyboards, suddenly finding them very interesting. The entire bank was silent now. Every person in the line was watching, their phones forgotten. No one was looking away anymore. The power in the room had shifted completely. The bullies had been cornered, not by a bigger bully, but by a simple, quiet question that exposed their ugliness for all to see. Keanu Reeves had not just stepped out of line. He had stepped into the space between cruelty and humanity, and he was holding that line. The silence that followed Keanu's words was a living thing. It wasn't empty. It was thick with shame and surprise. The manager, who just moments before had been the king of his small, shiny counter-kingdom, now looked like a schoolboy caught cheating on an exam. His face, which had been smooth and confident, was now a blotchy, nervous red. He fumbled with his tie, a useless, fidgety motion that did nothing to calm his racing heart. The tellers, who had been so bold in their mocking, were now shrinking behind their computer screens. Cindy stared at her keyboard as if it held the secrets to the universe, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. The young man with slicked back hair had completely vanished. Presumably to the safety of the staff room, the power had not just shifted. It had evaporated from the bank staff and condensed around the quiet man in the baseball cap and the small, frail woman he was protecting. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet intensity of his presence was more powerful than any shout could ever be. He kept his gaze on the manager, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking for an apology or a fight. He was simply waiting for a resolution, a return to basic human decency. The tension stretched, thin and taut, until the manager finally broke it. "No, sir, of course not," the manager said, his voice cracking slightly. He was trying to sound authoritative, but it came out as a weak squeak. "There must be a misunderstanding. We pride ourselves on excellent customer service. This is just a procedural issue." Keanu didn't respond to the excuse. Instead, he finally turned his attention away from the staff. He turned his body slightly, creating a physical barrier between the elderly woman and the tellers, and looked down at her. When his eyes met hers, all the hardness in his face melted away. His gaze was soft, kind, and full of a genuine concern that was so profound it made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. She had been so focused on the cruelty of the staff, on her own burning shame, that she hadn't really looked at the man who had come to her aid. Now, seeing the gentle empathy in his eyes, a tear she had been fighting back finally escaped, tracing a slow, warm path down her wrinkled cheek. "Are you okay, ma'am?" he asked. His voice was completely different now. It was the same voice, but the tone had changed from steel to velvet. He didn't wait for an answer. He saw the tear, and with a slow, gentle motion, reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a clean, folded handkerchief. He didn't hand it to her in a rushed way. He held it out for her, his movements respectful and patient. Eleanor took the handkerchief, her fingers brushing against his. It was a simple touch, but it felt like a lifeline. She dabbed at her eyes, the simple, human act grounding her again. She felt a little bit of the strength that had been drained away begin to return. She managed a small, watery nod. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice barely audible, he gave her a small, reassuring smile, a curve of his lips that was warm and genuine. "Let's get this taken care of," he said simply. He turned back to the manager, but this time he wasn't just a concerned citizen. He was an advocate. "This woman is here to do her business. She is a customer of your bank. You will process her transaction now." The word "now" was spoken with the same quiet calm as the rest of his words, but it landed with the force of a hammer. The manager jumped into action. "Yes, of course. Right away, sir. He snapped his fingers, motioning frantically for another employee to come over. You, get over here and help this customer. Use your override code? Do whatever it takes. I want this finished. The new employee, a young woman who had been watching the entire scene from a distance with wide, frightened eyes, rushed over. She looked terrified of making a mistake, but Keanu didn't focus on her. He stayed beside Eleanor, a quiet, steady presence. He didn't say anything else. He just stood there, making sure the transaction was handled correctly and with the respect that had been so lacking before. The new teller worked with a nervous speed, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The manager hovered over her shoulder, whispering commands. The whole process, which had been stalled by cruelty and laziness, was now a flurry of frantic activity. Eleanor, with Keanu's silent support, was able to answer the necessary questions. Her voice was still a little shaky, but it was clear. The atmosphere in the bank had completely changed. The other customers were no longer silent bystanders. They were watching with a new sense of respect, not just for the famous actor, but for the simple act of kindness they were witnessing. Some were quietly smiling. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief at the staff's earlier behavior. Finally, the machine whirred and a receipt began to print. The teller counted out the cash, her movements careful and precise, and placed it into an envelope along with the receipt. She handed it to Eleanor with a look of sincere apology in her eyes. "I am so very sorry for the trouble, ma'am," she said softly. Eleanor took the envelope. She felt its solid weight in her hand, the fulfillment of her promise to her granddaughter. She looked from the cash to the man standing beside her. The entire ordeal, which had felt like it would last a lifetime, was finally over. But the memory of his simple, powerful act of standing with her would last much longer. She turned to him, her heart overflowing with a gratitude so deep she didn't have the words for it. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to do that." Keanu just gave her that same gentle, warm smile. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Of course I did," he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. He didn't want praise or thanks. He just wanted her to know that she wasn't alone. He gave her another small, reassuring pat on the shoulder, a silent gesture of support. Then, with a final, polite nod, he turned and walked away. Not like a celebrity making a grand exit, but like a quiet hero who had simply done what needed to be done. He pulled his headphones from his pocket, put them on, and disappeared out the glass doors, leaving behind a bank full of people who had just witnessed a powerful lesson in humanity. The glass doors of the bank slid shut, and the man in the baseball cap was gone. But he didn't just leave. He left behind a completely different atmosphere. The air, once thick with tension and cruelty, now felt light and charged with a strange, electric quiet. It was the kind of silence that follows a powerful story told around a campfire, a silence filled with thought and feeling. The manager, looking pale and shaken, scurried back to his office without another word, closing the door behind him as if to hide from the judgment he felt in the lingering gazes of the customers. The tellers who had laughed were now busy with their work, their eyes glued to their screens, their faces a mixture of shame and relief that the ordeal was over. Eleanor stood at the counter for a long moment, clutching the envelope in her hand. The money inside was for her granddaughter, but the experience of receiving it had changed something deep inside her. She felt a profound sense of relief, but it was mixed with a lingering sadness that such kindness had been necessary. The handkerchief he had given her was still clutched in her other hand, a small, soft token of a moment of grace in a world that often felt hard and cold. As she turned to leave, a young woman who had been standing near the back of the line stepped forward. She had been the one with the flicker of pity in her eyes earlier, the one who had been too shy to speak up. Now, her face was full of quiet admiration. "That was amazing," the young woman said, her voice low and earnest. "What he did for you. I'm so sorry for how they treated you." Eleanor looked at her, saw the sincerity in her eyes, and felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, dear," she said softly. "People like him and people like you who see. That's what makes the world good." The young woman smiled, a genuine, kind smile that reached her eyes. She held up her phone. "I hope you don't mind," she said, a little hesitantly. "I recorded the end of it. When he stood up for you, I think the world needs to see that there are still good people." Eleanor wasn't entirely sure what recording meant or how the world would see it, but she understood the girl's intention. It was good, so she simply nodded. "That's all right. He is a good man." The encounter gave Eleanor the strength she needed to walk toward the doors. Her steps were still slow, but they were not the shaky, defeated steps she had taken when she first entered the bank. She walked with her head held a little higher. The world outside didn't seem so fast and intimidating anymore. It felt the same, but she felt different. She felt seen, and she felt protected. What happened next is a story that plays out in our modern world. The young woman, moved by what she had seen, went home and uploaded the short video to the internet. She didn't add any dramatic music or flashy effects. She simply wrote a caption, "Today I saw a true hero in a bank." He saw someone being treated badly and he didn't just stand by. He did something. Be like this guy. She didn't even initially use his full name, just called him the kind man at the bank. But the internet is a powerful force for recognition. Within hours, people were commenting, "That's Keanu Reeves." The video began to spread like wildfire. It wasn't just shared. It was felt. People didn't just watch it. They responded to it. They shared it with their own stories of being bullied, of being small, of wishing someone had stood up for them. The video went viral not because a celebrity was caught on camera, but because the story it told was universal. It was a story about courage, about using your voice for those who have none, about the simple, profound power of kindness. The news eventually reached the bank's corporate headquarters. The next morning, the bank released a public statement. It was a carefully worded apology expressing their deepest regret for the unacceptable behavior of our staff and promising a full internal investigation. They announced that the employees involved were being placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of that investigation. For many who saw the video, the apology felt hollow and late, but it was something. It was a public admission that what had happened was wrong. And that was a start. The story, however, found its most important audience hundreds of miles away in a small college dorm room. Eleanor's granddaughter saw the video after a friend tagged her in it, writing, "Oh my God, is this your grandma? The hero is Keanu Reeves." The young woman called her grandmother immediately, her voice a mixture of shock, awe, and overwhelming love. "Grandma, I saw it. I saw what happened. I can't believe those people. And then he just stood there with you. I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but I'm so proud of you. And I'm so grateful to him." Eleanor, sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, smiled. "Oh, that," she said, her voice calm and full of a new kind of wisdom. "It was just a little trouble, little bird. But don't you worry. A good man helps sort it out. The world is full of good people, you just have to find them." The story became more than just a viral video. It became a modern-day parable. Parents told their children the story at bedtime, not as a fairy tale, but as a true-life example of how to behave. Teachers used it in classrooms to talk about empathy and courage. It was a reminder that you don't need a cape or superpowers to be a hero. You just need to see someone who is struggling and decide not to look away. For Eleanor, the experience changed her life in a small but meaningful way. The shame was replaced by a quiet strength. She started going to the bank again, but this time a different branch. And when she went, she walked with a little more confidence, knowing that even in a crowd, kindness could find her. The check was cashed, the money was sent, and her granddaughter started her classes, fueled not just by the gift, but by the incredible story of love and bravery that came with it. And the man who had stepped in, he went back to his life, probably not even thinking about it again. But for everyone who saw the story, he left a permanent mark, a beautiful reminder that in a world that can often feel cold and uncaring, one person's quiet act of decency can warm the hearts of millions.